Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli, ameen. So inshallah today, I want to start by first welcoming all of you to this workshop. The main objective behind this is to really focus on skills this Ramadan, because this Ramadan, as you all are probably already feeling, it's going to be a little bit different. I think everyone, is kind of going through those same thoughts and emotions of, this Ramadan is going to look and feel a little bit different. There'll still be the consistency of the fasting, but a lot of the other things that we associate with Ramadan, a lot of the community, a lot of the gathering, that's going to be something that's going to be different this Ramadan. And, the intention behind this workshop was to hopefully provide something to focus on this month, and really to take it down to foundational skills to work on as well. Because a lot of times, people ask, like, I want to study Arabic or I want to connect with the Qur'an, and there's a lot out there about those topics. You can listen to a lecture, a motivational speech about those kinds of things, but oftentimes what I've experienced and what I try to kind of encourage and teach my students is that, if you can have some kind of personal connection with the Quran, if you approach it in a very personal way, you have your time with the Quran, whether that's through your study or reading. And if that time is spent kind of in an enjoyable manner, you're either working on some kind of skill or you're getting better at something, you'll want to do it more and more. So that's kind of the idea behind these two things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to really focus on, two main things. The first thing is reading fluency. And obviously all of this is reading fluency of the Quran. And the second thing is going to be kind of an introduction to Quran memorization. All right, so the hope is that everyone who's kind of in this workshop, really the first step before both of these things would be to learn how to read, learning the basics of reading the Quran. And again, that's not going to be covered in this workshop. However, there is a class that I started 2 weeks ago, and it's every Tuesday, and it's going to be ongoing for a while until we kind of complete it, basically, until you can read the Quran at a very fundamental level. That's on Tuesdays. That's information's available online in whatever the normal qalam places that you find stuff. But that's a class where, we started at the letters. We've gotten through like 10 or 15 letters, and we're starting at the, absolute basics to build up on how to learn, how to read, starting from the letters. So that's going to be something that's going to go on for the next few months. So if that's where you're at, that would be the place to start before you start reading fluency. So I just want to kind of make that clear that reading fluency, it kind of has an assumption that you can read from the Quran at a very basic level. It doesn't assume that you read very quickly, but hopefully through the program and through reading fluency, you will work on that kind of speed and accuracy. Now, before I shift over to the other document with the notes on reading fluency, I want to just give you a little bit of background on where this idea even came from of reading fluency, and why I spend so much time talking about it. My students know that this is something that I emphasize a lot in the beginning of any real Arabic education, because it's one of those things that's so often overlooked, but it's one of those skills that helps so much, really, in your engagement with the Quran, in your ability to memorize the Quran, in your ability to learn Arabic, in your ability to translate the Quran. It's one of those things that's so often overlooked, but it's so important, and actually it's not so hard to work on your own. So I'll give you a little bit of background as to kind of where this started. It started in two places. The first one was when I was studying Arabic. I found that, when as a class we reached the point where now we had to read larger portions of the Quran and try to translate, or we had to read portions of Arabic text and try to translate, I found that, like, in our class amongst the students, there was a bit of a divide. I found that, I was able to kind of take that leap from having the knowledge and understanding of Arabic and how it works and how to translate. And I was able to apply it to, reading something or reading a lot of Quran and translating. And I found that there was a portion of the class and my classmates that, they weren't able to make that jump. And the reason they weren't able to make that jump wasn't because they didn't know the information well, because they might have known the information even better than I did, but making the jump was still a little bit harder for them. And as I kind of thought about it for a while and tried to help, some of my classmates, I realized that the gap there was not a gap in understanding of Arabic and its concepts, but it was something as simple as reading fluency. If you're spending a long time connecting letters and connecting words, and it's taking you a while to even read a section of the Quran, then of course, if you want to memorize that section, you're going to have to first get fluent at reading it before you can even think about memorizing it, right? Similarly, when we study Arabic, if you want to translate this much of Quran, you're going to have to first be able to read it and know what the words are to even start applying your understanding of Arabic grammar or vocabulary to translate it. You have to know what the words are. So that's why kind of this idea of reading fluency is so important. And it goes hand in hand with memorization as well, because another experience, two of my friends who were trying to memorize, we would sit with them and we were trying to kind of build a system where they would recite and, memorize small portions at a time and kind of do something over the summer. And I noticed that, for some people, it was taking a very long time to memorize a small portion, and for other people, it wasn't taking as long. And again, it's not a question of aptitude, because, the people that are doing this are very bright, they're very capable, but there's something missing underneath. And that skill, again, was reading fluency. The student and the person that is more fluent can skip the part where they're just deciphering a portion of the Quran and they can jump right into memorizing, versus someone whose fluency is weak, they have to spend a lot of time just deciphering what are these words before they can even think about memorizing, right? So that's why this is almost like step one of memorization. Before you can even think about memorizing the Quran, I recommend before you even try to get, build a memorization routine, you have to first make sure that you're fluent, right? And that's what we're going to talk about now. So I wrote up this document many, many, many years ago. It was based on a game that I used to play with two students that I used to teach. They were like 6 and 7 years old. They were my classmates' kids, and I used to teach them Quran. And, again, the parents were very kind of, they said they just learned how to read. So, working on their reading would be great. And then, of course, we would like them to memorize a little bit later on as well. So, alhamdulillah, it was two brothers, 6 and 7 years old. I found that I needed to keep them motivated somehow. So this program really developed out of a game that I made for them, just trying to keep them motivated and competing with each other. That's kind of the recipe for success. If you have two brothers close in age, you add any kind of game, any kind of competition, and they'll just do it forever. So ultimately, I just wanted them to read more and more. I wanted them to become more and more fluent. And the way that I turned it into a game was by simply adding a stopwatch and adding a time to their reading. So I would say, okay, go review this many lines. And when you come back, you have to get it in under, and I would just come up with an arbitrary number. I'd kind of see, okay, how long will they just not be able to make it? Like if I say 1.5 minutes, it's gonna take them about 1:40, then they'll have something to strive towards, and I'll just keep adjusting it as I go. And I really just started as this thing that was not an actual system that was written out or anything like that, but it's just a game that I was playing with, these two students that I used to teach, and it really motivated them. They wanted to beat the time, and then there'd be random prizes or gifts after you finish and complete the level, and then I'd create the next level. Level 2 is this, and level 2 you have to complete X number of lines in this much time, and it was just meant to keep these kids motivated and have them compete against each other. But what I found was that I later that year I met a brother who had been studying Arabic for a very long time, and he came to visit us, and he was interested in studying Arabic in that same institute in the following year. And he was trying to get admission, and he was trying to check everything out. And I quickly realized that he actually knew way more Arabic than we did. He had been studying for such a long time, and his Arabic was so good, and his understanding was so much better than ours. He had so much depth. But it still took him a very long time to translate the Quran, because I realized when he started reading the ayahs, it took him a very long time to just read one ayah. But once he was done reading it, he could translate it and explain it like better than we could. So, he saw me kind of teaching these kids and doing this game, and he said, can you write that up and send it to me? Because he was going back to, where he came from, where he was from. Actually, his name was Ubaid. My name's Ubaidullah. So we got along just on name alone. But, when he went back home, he kept emailing me and texting me and saying, hey, can you send me that game? Send me that game. And I said, well, I don't know what to send you. Like, it's just this arbitrary game that I'm playing. I kept insisting. So ultimately, then I sat down and wrote something. And that's what this document is. I've pretty much never edited since that day. And it's been at least 9 years, almost 10 years since I wrote it. So it's not the most exciting document, but I will show you how it works. It's just a little game that I created to help you build reading fluency. The point is, if you read every single day, if you read for 10, 15 minutes a day, and you focus on timing yourself and logging your progress, over time you'll see growth, and you'll see yourself increase your fluency and your accuracy and speed. So that's ultimately it. There's no secret formula here other than read every single day, read with purpose, with the objective of getting faster and becoming more accurate and efficient, and you will if you do it every single day. So here's the reading fluency document. Again, all the documents can be found here at tinyurl.com/qalam-memorize. Once the class is over, I'll upload any updated documents and changes. So let's take a look at this reading fluency document first. All right, so there's an introduction here. The introduction basically says, you're not going to see progress all at once. This is one of those things that you have to do 10, 15 minutes every single day. And then in 3-4 weeks, you'll see some progress. It's not like you do it for 4 days, you can cram it, and all of a sudden you'll be fluent. Whenever you're trying to work on these kinds of skills, you can never cram. Cramming it will not, make you good and proficient at it. It doesn't build mastery. Mastery comes from doing it every single day. Another example I can give is I don't know, any skill. I guess you can talk about cooking. If you just learn to cook a bunch of things over the weekend, but you don't practice, you don't repeat that process, if you come to revisit in a month or two, you're not necessarily going to be there. All right, so let's take a look at the fluency program. I'll take questions at the end, inshallah, of each thing. So once I finish the reading fluency, I'll take questions, and then we'll get to the memorization, and I'll take questions there as well. So again, it'll take time, but you have to do it every single day. What I recommend here is that keep a Qur'an or a mushaf by your bedside, so that even if you're about to go to sleep and you didn't do your daily log of reading, that you kind of get up and just read for 10, 15 minutes, log your time, and then go to sleep. So don't skip any day at all. And Ramadan is a great opportunity to at least get 30 days under your belt, right? To read for a minimum of 10 to 15 minutes a day. And you'll see, if you're tracking your time, you'll see huge progress even in just that 1 month, inshallah. All right, so the first one, level 1 is to read 5 lines in less than 120 seconds. So 5 lines in 2 minutes. The process, general process, you don't have to follow it to a T, but generally read it a few times. I recommend 3 times before you time yourself, because if you time yourself on your first read, especially in the beginning, your first read will be very slow, right? And it's not necessarily the best assessment. So you can read it 2 or 3 times and then time yourself. I don't recommend reading it too many times, because if you read it 7, 8, 10 times before you time it, every time you read it, you're going to get more and more fluent. That time that you do after 10 repetitions is not going to be a great assessment of where you're actually at, right? Because you read anything 10 times, you should get really fluent with it. And you'll think that, oh man, I'm already so fluent. But no, you're fluent because you read it 10 times. So if you read it 2 or 3 times and time yourself, I think that's a good place to be. So you'll read 5 lines 2 or 3 times. So you'll start a timer, read. When you're done, stop the timer and log your time. All right. And I have this kind of basic log sheet, but you can do this however you want. You can write the time. How many times did you read it before you logged your time, before you did the time run? What page did you read? Which lines did you read of the Quran? And what level are you on? Again, level 1 is to do 5 lines in under 2 minutes. Now, I'll show you another thing that one of my students did last year, and I really liked it. So here's an example of a 15-line mushaf. All right, so this is where the 5 lines comes from. So generally, this is a standard mushaf. You can find it online. A lot of the apps that you'll use will have this mushaf as well. The advantage of the 15-line mushaf is that it's consistent. Every page has about the same amount of information. So when we say 5 lines, that means like a third of the page. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, it's by lines, because if you do it by ayahs, it won't be a consistent amount of reading. So you'll kind of time yourself and you'll stop your time here. You can continue to read the ayah till the end, but to get an accurate assessment of time, you want to stop right at the end of 5 lines. So you'll start here, read 5 lines, and then you'll just keep reading. You'll read this same 5 lines 2 or 3 times, and you'll time yourself, and then you're done. All right. So what one of my students was doing, because he was very interested in building fluency rather quickly, and actually I didn't know this, but apparently he had just recently learned how to read the Qur'an just a few months prior to entering the full-time Arabic program. So he was really interested in building his fluency, and really I couldn't tell that he had just learned how to read, because he was so dedicated and he was so consistent with doing this. He would actually do it twice a day. He would do 1 reading in the morning, time himself 1 in the evening, and do twice a day to really build it up twice as fast, get more repetitions in. So what he would do, which I really liked, is that in his mushaf, he would mark the 5 lines and he'd put the time on the side over here. He'd write his time for that day. So he'd write like, a minute 30, and then the next 5 lines. And then this is a question that used to get asked all the time. And this was, the next day, am I reading the same 5 lines? No, the next day you're moving to the next 5 lines. Remember, every day you should be reading a new section, because the objective is to get an assessment of your fluency. So if you read the same 5 lines for a week, obviously by the end of the week, you're going to be like, I nailed it after 5 days, my fluency is perfect, I'm moving on. But obviously that's not an accurate assessment. So you want to start a new section every single day in the reading fluency cycle. All right. Now the question is, how do you move from one level to the next level? How do I go from level 1 to level 2? And I say this at the bottom of each level, is that if you can beat the goal of the level for 3 days in a row, then you can move on to the next level. The reason I say 3 days in a row is because sometimes you come across a passage in the Qur'an that's very familiar. You've either heard it a lot or it has a lot of like simple things that come in many places in the Qur'an. So you're going to be a lot faster in those. And if you come across one of those and you pass the time, really that's not a great assessment of your fluency. So if you can do it 3 days in a row, then that shows, okay, now you're ready. This goal is very achievable and attainable for you. Now we need to up the difficulty a little bit. All right. So the next goal, level 2, is to read 7.5 lines, which is half a page, in the same amount of time. So now you're upping the number of lines, right? Again, same goal, read it. I don't know why it says 5 times. The numbers on here are pretty arbitrary. Just give it a few reads, 2 or 3 reads, then time yourself. You don't even have to read it again after you time yourself. I know I make that recommendation in here, but that's really just an ideal situation. Again, this shouldn't take longer than 10 or 15 minutes. You have to do it every single day, and that's why I'm trying to keep the daily amount of time spent on it to a minimum, because if it turns into like a 45-minute thing, you're not going to do it every single day. You'll do it today, you might do it tomorrow, and then you'll skip it for like 4 or 5 days, and then you'll come back to it. And that's not something that you can afford when you're trying to build your reading fluency. You really have to do it every single day. So that's why, like, I would say focus on doing like 10 or 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and then time yourself, right? However many repetitions you did in 10 minutes, and then just time yourself, and you're done for the day. Then work on do your fluency log the next day. All right. So level 2 is half a page in 2 minutes. Same idea. When you're able to do this for 3 days in a row, then you can move on to the next level. Level 3 is to do an entire page, is to now take basically the same goal as level 2. So level 2 was half a page in 2 minutes. Level 3 is to do an entire page in 4 minutes. So it's really the same goal, but now it's testing your stamina a little bit. It's trying to see, can you read with that kind of speed and efficiency for a whole page, or like do you get tired and exhausted along the way? And it really just builds your stamina a little bit. It's not a different goal necessarily than level 2, but the objective is just to get your stamina up a little bit. So it's a whole page in 4 minutes. Same thing, read it 1 or 2 times and time yourself. Once you can accomplish it for 3 days in a row, then you can move on to the next level. Remember, be honest with yourself. It says that on every single level, because you just want to do an accurate assessment. There's no score you're trying to beat. No one's going to be impressed by your times either. You're totally doing this for yourself. And you're just trying to make sure that you really build mastery. So you want to be very critical of yourself. All right, so don't kind of try to cut corners and things like that. Level 4 is to do an entire page in 3 minutes. All right, so now it never goes more than a page. You're just gonna try to bring the time down now. So do a whole page in 3 minutes, and then level 5, which is the final level, is to do a whole page in 2 minutes. All right, in under 2 minutes. So that's quite a big jump. On level 1, you start with 5 lines in 2 minutes, and by level 5, the hope is to do an entire page in under 2 minutes. And again, that's a pretty good place to be in terms of fluency. Now, one other major question that gets asked usually when I do this presentation is, what speed am I reading at? Now, the objective here is not to read super slow. Like, don't go like full Tajweed warrior, like, extending everything like 1,000 beats and things like that. Don't do that, but also don't read so fast that you're not articulating the letters. Read at a moderate speed. Don't race, make sure you do justice to the Quran and the recitation of the Quran. So read at a reasonable pace. Just if you get too involved in the Tajweed rules, then it's going to take forever. Like, that's not applying the Tajweed rules in a very kind of detailed manner is just a different goal than trying to build fluency. So you can't assess your time based on that. So just try to read at a reasonable pace. Don't rush necessarily, because you'll make mistakes. And at the same time, don't go super slow, because it's not going to be a great assessment. Basically, if you read super slow, you're never going to accomplish level 5, and you'll just be doing this forever. All right. So that's kind of the basic reading fluency program. It's just 5 stages. Just as a recap, you basically just have to read every single day for 10 or 15 minutes, log your time so that you can see your progress and growth over time. And that's about it. Again, the objectives here are speed and accuracy. So you can't just start reading really fast and you're butchering everything and messing up letters and vowels. Obviously, that would be problematic as well. Ultimately, if you can read to someone, that's always great, at least once, because if you're making mistakes while you're reading, you're not going to be able to catch those on your own. If you're at level 1, like you're kind of you just learned how to read, or you haven't kind of read in a long time, then I'd recommend at least once a day reading to someone, because then that person can kind of correct any mistakes that you made, because you don't want to read something like 4 or 5 times and read it wrong, and then it kind of starts setting the wrong way. Right? You start memorizing something, or you start getting used to something in the wrong way. So you don't want to do that either. All right, so any questions, comments, concerns on the reading fluency side of things before we move on to memorization? You can type out your questions, or I guess there is a raise hand feature in here somewhere. Yeah, there is. You can raise your hand and I can call you up. Great question. What happens after level 5? Oh, sorry, I skipped a question. Are you reading the same page or each time different pages? So this is the question I already addressed, but each time, every day, you're moving to the next 5 lines or next half a page or next page. Every day you want to read something new, because you want a new accurate assessment of your reading fluency. So if you go back here, so day 1 you did 5 lines. Day 2 you're doing the next 5, then the next day the next 5. So as I mentioned, my student, he used to write his times over here and here and here. So every day you could flip through his Qur'an and see his time getting better and better and better. You're not reading with meaning, you're just reading with a focus on fluency. So remember, the singular objective here is just fluency. You want to make sure that when we're talking about level 5, that you can read kind of quickly and accurately. I would recommend starting at Surah Baqarah. maybe skipping the first few pages because everyone's really familiar with those. You hear them all the time. But I would recommend starting somewhere at the beginning and just chipping away at the Quran. Because if you start reading from random places, you can't really check your work. You won't see progress, and it's just annoying to be jumping around too much. There's another. What happens after level 5? After level 5, the idea is that now you're fluent and you should start working on memorization, building a memorization routine, which is also going to be time-based, as we're going to talk about next, inshallah. Could I show you the proper speed? Yes, I will show you, inshallah. How do you build confidence in your reading? Stumble on the letter or word, even though I know it's right and the fluency seems to fall apart. Honestly, the confidence comes from this. If you do it enough, your confidence will come. However, I have run into situations where there's just this kind of block from reading out loud in front of people. And that's almost like a different thing that you have to work on. And again, I would maybe encourage the same approach, like read 5 lines out loud to someone and stumble, and it'll be difficult at first, but do it every day. Read it to someone you're a little more comfortable with at first, but kind of articulating and reading out loud is really, really important. Because if you're not, I should have said that even when you're doing this whole reading fluency, make sure you're reading out loud and not just reading in your head. Because when you read in your head, you can read 1,000 miles per hour. You're like, I'm so fast, right? No, but you need to like read out loud to see whether you can articulate at the same speed that you can think and all that. So you want to read out loud, and don't be that kid in the masjid who's like memorizing and is just like yelling. Just read like a normal person in normal volume. Reading with a reciter also helps, but it won't build your fluency. Reading with a reciter can help check your accuracy, but it won't necessarily build your fluency. And we're going to talk about listening when we talk about memorization. Is complete knowledge of tajweed the prerequisite for this? I don't think so. Tajweed is a different skill. I do recommend that everyone should at least first work on their pronunciation of the letters, because that's something that's hard to fix later on. Like if you're just zwalini all over the place, wala zwalina means, that's a problem, and it's going to be hard to fix later when you learn it. So just learn how letters are pronounced. That's going to be important. But like the detailed tajweed rules, those can come over time. Memorization, I'm going to go over a strategy for a full program for memorization as well in just a minute. I think recite for tajweed. Yes, you can read along for tajweed. So again, I do want to make a distinction here for everyone. You know, we have to remember that whatever we're talking about, each of these things is going to have a different objective. So reading fluency, your goal is speed and accuracy, right? Now, when we talk about tajweed, that's a different objective, right? Reading properly, applying the rules of tajweed, that's a different goal than fluency. It's not the same thing, right? And then when we talk about memorization, that's going to be a different thing as well. So just keep in mind that each of these skills, while they're all related to reading the Quran, they're in slightly different areas. All right. It's okay if you have difficulty pronouncing it, but ultimately, it's a good idea to at least, I would say, learn how to pronounce the letters properly, just the letters. And there's tons and tons of resources out there on YouTube and different places like that. If you can even join our basics of reading class that I do on Tuesdays. Right now we're doing the letters. So I do go over just basic rules of how to pronounce each letter correctly. I don't spend too much time on it, but it's definitely something you want to try to work on. Of course, it takes people a very long time, and that's okay, but you definitely want to just make an effort towards learning how to pronounce the letters properly. All right, any other questions before we move on to the memorization side? Oops. All right. Okay, so let's take a look here. So for memorization, I wrote this up. So this has been something that people have always asked. So people do the reading fluency program, they finish it, and they're like, okay, what do I do next? And I'm like, you should memorize. And they're like, how do I do that? And I'm like, I don't really know how to put it into words. And really, I still don't know really how to put it into a proper document. So I wrote some stuff down, but it's really meant to be a supplement to my explanation. And maybe, with your help and through this, I'll be able to refine this document and it'll become more and more helpful as we go. But this is kind of the first iteration. So first thing, Introduction to Quran Memorization. The program is designed to introduce a student of the Quran to the basic components of memorization. there's a few important things to keep in mind when approaching Quran memorization. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I want to break down what does it even mean to memorize, right? That's kind of a really daunting thing. And maybe a lot of people think like, you know what, it's a very exclusive thing that only a small group of people do. They memorize the Quran. I don't necessarily have to do that. Now, I would say that this program is not necessarily there to make you memorize the entire Quran. The objective of this is that, you know, if you want to talk about connecting with the Quran, one of the best ways to connect with the Quran is to have some kind of daily memorization routine. It's so like if you have a nice routine and you're spending a little bit of time every single day, maybe like half an hour to an hour a day, right? And I know you're like, oh my God, that's so much. That's literally like one TV show, okay? Like one TV show's worth of time a day, you know, working on your memorization, you'll see that connection that you have with the Quran after doing that for a week or two is going to be different than any other. It's so personal to you. It's so gratifying to like slowly make progress in your memorization. It's so, you know, it's beautiful that after 2 weeks, you've been putting in just a little bit of time every single day, and after 2 weeks, you memorize like Surah Mulk or you memorize Surah Yasin. And it's a surah that you've heard so many times, but now it's like, you know it, you know, it's, you can recite it by heart whenever you want to. Like, that is just something completely different. Like it's, when you talk about connecting with the Quran, it's really a type of connection that is only felt until you experience it, right? I can talk, you can listen to a lot of lectures about connecting with the Quran, and we can talk about, you know, reading the meaning, reading the tafsir, understanding this ayah better, but there's just a certain beauty and kind of a certain sweetness to memorizing the Quran and being able to recite your favorite portions of the Quran. And it builds a connection that I think is very special. And I think that everyone should try to do that. Even if you're not trying to memorize the entire Quran, you're just trying to memorize a little more Quran than you know right now, right? Like if right now when you're praying, you're reading the same surahs over and over, imagine now that you can read just a little bit more. You can have a little more variety in your recitation. Or let's say, you know, there are a few surahs of the Quran that you really know the meaning of well, and you really love those surahs, and now you want to memorize those, right? That's, again, that's another great thing to work on. So the goal is not necessarily to memorize the entire Quran. The goal is to just start memorization. All right. So let's take a look at section number 1. So the first thing is the idea of divide and conquer. Okay, so memorizing the Quran, it's not very different than memorizing a large set of vocabulary. Now, this is something that if you were like a really driven student in high school, you might have done this for the SAT or the ACT, or if you're in college, you might have done this for your LSAT or your MCAT or different exams like that. I say that as someone who never really did this, but I'm just putting that out there for people that did do that. You know, memorizing 2,000 words, it might seem like a lot. Like if you memorize these thousands of words for the SAT, it'll help you, blah, 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 get all these points, whatever. It seems like so much, but if you split it up into smaller sections, if you think about it in terms of 10 sets of 200 words, it becomes way more manageable, right? And the same philosophy really works here. When we're thinking about memorization, it's going to, you're going to have to split up what that means. What does it mean for me to memorize one juz, right? What does it mean for me to memorize this surah? If you can split it up into main components and pieces, that really helps you figure out a game plan on how you're going to approach this, all right? So again, here I mentioned typically students are encouraged to memorize the 30th juz first because it has a lot of surahs that you're either already familiar with or you've already memorized. And they're shorter, so you can have a lot of small wins along the way. All right. The next thing is understanding the parts of memorization. Now, this is something that for anyone that's done Hifz or they've memorized Quran, there's different terms that are used for all of these things. So I put the terms in parentheses. I don't think they're as important. What's more important is what each of them represent. So the first thing that you want to tackle when you're memorizing the first part is the new material, right? You want to know what is the next section that I'm going to work on memorizing. What is today's new material? All right. So now let's say today, you know, I'm memorizing Surah Yasin, and I've already completed let's say I've already completed the first, let's say 7 ayats. Today I'm going to work on the next 3. I want to get up to 10. So today's new material is ayahs 8 to 10. All right, so that's known as your new material, also known as sabak or whatever else. I don't know. There's probably tons of terms out there. Right, so that's part number 1. Part number 2 is your recently memorized material. All right, this is a combination of the last 5 or 10 new materials that you just did. For example, if we're talking about Surah Yasin here, and we're saying that today's lesson, let's say today's lesson is this much, okay? That means your recently memorized is the last 5 to 10 things. So just go backwards from your new material, the last 5 to 10 things that you memorized. So that'll be the last like page or 2 that you memorize, depending on how much you're memorizing. If you're only memorizing 3 lines a day, then your last 5 to 10 lessons will make up like 2 pages. If you're memorizing a page a day, your last 5 to 10 lessons will be like a quarter or a half a juz. So it'll vary based on how much you're memorizing, but the idea is this stuff is very fresh, okay? You just memorized it yesterday. It doesn't mean you still remember it today. So it's going to be important that every single day you're going and reviewing the stuff you just memorized. It's just way too fresh to leave alone for a long time. So you want to revisit it often. All right, and that's why the last 5 or 10 things that 10 sections that you memorize. And of course, you should be memorizing in some kind of order so you can track that, not like random 5 lines in different places. So that's going to be something that's very, very important. And the analogy I'll give you is, this is like the story of my life, okay, in college, is if you remember cramming for a test, right, you know this much material is on the midterm, you know exactly what's going to be covered, you just need to get it all in your head. You need it to get in your head before a certain time. You just need to take the test and then you're done. That's like what I did in every class, that example. But you know, you memorize it, you cram it, you do okay on the test, and then literally like 3 days later, if someone asked you a question, you would have no idea about any of that stuff. Because cramming something doesn't mean that you memorized it, right? If you want to test that I really know this stuff, you're gonna have to revise it for a few days. You're gonna have to revise it for the next 5 or 10 days, and then you can feel pretty confident that, okay, I know this really, really well. Okay, so let me I want to show you a practical example of all of these things as we move along. So let's go to Surah Mulk, okay? Surah number, what number are you? 67, okay? So Surah Mulk, let's say you started memorizing it. This is the first thing you've ever memorized. You're taking it just a little bit at a time. So you did like 4 lines, then 4 lines, and 4 lines, and 4 lines, and now you're on the second page of Surah Mulk. Okay, I wish I could do a side-by-side view pages. I don't know that I can. You keep going. You're on the next page now. You're tackled until, let's say, ayah number 25. Okay. Now, once you started Surah Mulk, and every day as you progressed, you were reviewing from the beginning over and over and over again. By the time you get here, the obvious thing is that this stuff, the stuff right before your new material, is going to be okay. It's not going to be the best, but it's going to be better than today's stuff because you repeated it a few times. But the beginning of the surah is going to be rock solid because you've been reading it every single day for 10 days. Now you feel super confident with this stuff. So the idea is that the way to think about it is like, as you keep chipping forward, you're maintaining that 5 to 10 lesson block that is just moving with you. And the idea is that the stuff that has been repeated 5 or 10 times, that stuff after 10 repetitions, you can confidently say, you know what, I could recite that. I feel really good about it. I don't need to review it as often. I still need to review it. And that's going to come up in the next section. All right. So again, we're still talking about the recently memorized. Then the third kind of realm of memorization is the old material, where now this is stuff that is not new material and last 10 lessons. Right? This is everything other than that, everything that you've previously memorized. This is stuff that now has gone through the repetitions, it's gone through the 5 or 10 reps, and you feel pretty confident in it. It still needs to be reviewed because if you don't review it, over time you're going to forget it, right? So you have to review it to keep it solid. Of course, you know, there are people in the world like who have done this for years and years and years, and they've been consistent, and they do reach a point in their life after like 10, 15 years where they're like, I'm good, I got this, right? And I know a few of those people, like my uncle, he's like that. Sheikh Abdul Nasser is basically like that. You know, they memorized at a very young age, and they let Tarawih, and they like, you know, reviewed, they put their time in for like 20 years. Then now it's kind of like, you know, one read and they're ready to go, right? So that only comes with consistency and doing this exercise every single day. So the old material, how much old material should you be reviewing? That's going to depend on how much there is. So let's say you're someone who's memorized half a juz, okay? You just started memorizing, you've gotten through half, which is great. You know, you're memorizing your next surahs, you're doing your recently memorized, and now you have half a juz that you want to make sure that you're reviewing, all right? Now, the half a juz, you just want to make sure that everything that you've memorized, the total sum of what you have memorized, that you go through it at least every 1 or 2 weeks, right? I think that's the important thing to keep in mind, at least in the beginning. So whatever time, so for example, if you've memorized 5 juz, right, then maybe you do half a juz revision of old stuff every day so that in a week or 2, you've covered those 5 juz. You just don't want to be away from it for too long, but you can afford to be away from it for a few days, for a few weeks at a time. I hope that makes sense. So the difference is that the recently memorized, you don't want to be away from it at all until it's gotten 10 repetitions. The old material, you can be away from it for a week or 2, but you still want to make sure you go back and revisit it often enough, right? So these are the 3 kind of parts of memorization. There's new material, recently memorized, and old material, all right? The next thing is, when should I memorize? Now, again, for all of this stuff, what I've written throughout here is that it's all gonna really depend on you and what works with your schedule. But one thing that I recommend is whatever time you decide to dedicate for memorization, try to be consistent in that time. Try to like, just never compromise that as your memorization time. So like whatever time it is, just every day drop whatever you're doing and do your memorization. Don't skip it, and try to pick a time with that in mind. So for example, you know, don't pick like, you know, 3:30 when you have so many other things to do. Don't pick that time. Either pick early in the morning, pick later at night, pick a time where you can be consistent. And here I do recommend try at least to do it at Fajr time. Give it a shot. If you're not a morning person and you think that's like never going to work for you, I still recommend trying it once or twice. And there's just a certain barakah and blessing in that time. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes reference to that in Surah Isra. He says, Inna Qur'an al-Fajri kana mashhuda. He makes reference to reciting the Quran at that time, that it is witnessed. And really that's kind of open to interpretation, but ultimately we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put blessing in tahajjud time and fajr time. And that's the, you know, one of the best times that you can recite Quran. And I can tell you from personal experience, you know, whenever I sat down in that time to memorize something and learn something well, I was able to get so much more done in a smaller amount of time. And I think it's just a perfect example of what barakah is, right? We oftentimes try to think about what does it mean to have barakah in your time or in your wealth or in whatever. Ultimately, barakah is when a little bit goes a long way. So when 20 minutes of focused memorization feels like you spent an hour or 2 hours, that means there was a lot of barakah in that 20 minutes. And I do, you know, believe very confidently that in that time, in the fajr time or more, you know, suhoor time, that time, early morning time, there's a lot of barakah. And if you can make that your memorization time, you'll find just huge benefit in that. Now, there's something down here that I wrote. It's called primer time. So I didn't know what else to call it. But this is the analogy, where the word comes from is primer versus paint, right? So I do recommend that if you're going to memorize something new, let's say, you know, tomorrow's goal is, tomorrow I want to memorize the first 4 lines of Surah Mulk, first 4 ayahs. I want to memorize these and I'm going to recite them to someone tomorrow. What I recommend is that split up your memorization of the new material into 2 time slots. One of them, think of it as a primer. It's very short, 5 to 10 minutes, right? You're just reading it a bunch of times. You're getting familiar with it. You're like, what I recommend is this. For example, if I'm trying to memorize this, I'll say, Tabarakalladhi, Tabarakalladhi, Tabarakalladhi. I'll kind of close my eyes and say, can I repeat it? Tabarakalladhi, yeah, I can. Okay, cool, I'm going to move on. Because this is just a primer. Warm-up time. It's not, I'm not like really going to recite after this, but can I say Tabarak? Can I remember what I just read for like 3 seconds? Okay, cool, I'm going to move on. Biyadihi al-mulk, biyadihi al-mulk. And I close my eyes, can I say biyadihi al-mulk? Okay. وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Recite it a few times, recite it a few times. You just kind of read it a bunch of times. You get really familiar with it. You didn't really memorize it. Just because you can close your eyes and repeat what you just read, it does not mean that you memorized it. But you gave it a primer, you warmed it up a little bit, so that now, when you actually sit down with that dedicated barakah-filled time, you can really maximize that section that you're memorizing. So what I would recommend is, if you're going to memorize something tomorrow, if tomorrow morning is my prime memorization slot, my main slot, that means tonight for 5 or 10 minutes, I'm gonna read this a few times. I'm gonna get familiar with it. I'm gonna get really fluent in its reading. I'm gonna get confident with the pronunciation. Anything that's difficult to read, I'm gonna say it a few times and get warmed up to it. And then I'm just gonna go to sleep. I wasn't really worried about memorizing it right now. I'm just getting it ready for the morning, right? And then in the morning, when you have your 20 minutes, now you're doing that paint quote. Now you're like getting it, you're spending your time, you're focusing, you're getting every nook and cranny. You don't want to miss anything. You're paying attention to all the details. That's the morning time. So I would recommend you split it up into 2 time slots. All right. Okay, now the next question is, how should I memorize? This is something that is a hard question to answer, because ultimately I believe that every person comes up with their own system that's unique to them and that's really personal to them. But what I think there are some basic steps that we can put together. All right. So for example, oh, sorry, did I skip how much should I memorize? Yeah, sorry. Let me go back to how much should I memorize. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about what to do in those time slots in the how to memorize section. So that's coming up. But let's talk about how much should you aim to memorize. All right. This is a question that I get asked often, and ultimately with anything like this, I think you should go with a time-based approach versus a quantity approach. Instead of thinking that I need to memorize 5 lines a day or I need to memorize 2 ayahs a day, I think you should go with time versus quantity. All right, because what I think is that you're trying to build a consistent habit. If you want to memorize the Quran, you have to be consistent. Memorize any portion of the Quran, not even the entire thing, but even if you want to tackle a surah, you have to be consistent. If you're not consistent, you spend so much time just revising, stuff that you forgot over the gap, over your lack of consistency. So you have to be consistent, and I think it's easier to be consistent when it's a time-based approach versus some days taking 45 minutes to an hour and other days taking 20 minutes. But if you can just say, every day my primer is going to be 5 to 10 minutes and my memorization time is going to be 20 to 30 minutes. And I'm going to do that every single day. It's not about how much I memorize in that time. It's just going to be, I'm going to give a rough estimate. I'm going to pick, based on my primer, I'm going to pick however much I can get done in 20 to 30 minutes. All right, so I don't think you should do it based on number of ayahs or number of lines, but how much you memorize should be based on time spent. And what you're going to find is that as you get better at memorizing, that same 20, 30 minutes, eventually you'll be able to memorize half a page, and memorize a page in the same amount of time. So if you can get consistent with the time, the amount that you memorize during that time will eventually get better. So don't worry about, oh, I'm not memorizing enough. If you can get consistent, that time, you'll just be able to accomplish more and more in that time, right? Consistency is everything. I said that here. Remember, consistency is everything. Memorizing the Quran is impossible without consistency. Really building any worthwhile skill or ability is impossible without consistency. All right. Now, the question that some of you have been asking is, well, how do I memorize? Now, again, this is something that's going to be hard. This is what I was mentioning. This is something that's personal to everyone. However, I do think there are some steps that you can take. And what I mentioned in here is think of it like a micro process of the overall new material, old material, new material, recently memorized old material. Think of doing that on a very small scale. For example, and I'll show you a practical example with Surah Mulk over here. Okay, so your objective, let's say, is I'm going to memorize the first 2 ayahs of Surah Mulk. That is my objective for the next 30 minutes. All right. What I recommend you not do is just keep reading all of it over and over. All right. Don't just be like, تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور, and just keep reading that and expect that eventually it'll just stick. I don't think that's a very efficient approach. Take this and split it up into smaller pieces, right? So find smaller kind of digestible chunks. So first focus on this much. Read it 2 or 3 times, looking at it, you know, maybe 5, 10 times, then try to close your eyes. Do you remember it? Okay, I kind of do, but I'm not confident. Look at it again, you know, try to read it again. Then once you feel confident, move to the next section. Do the same thing. Once you get the next section down, make sure really the only crucial thing I can tell you is make sure you're always connecting your pieces back. Because another problem that can happen is, what I don't recommend is don't do this over and over, and don't do this. I got this, got this, got this, got this, got this, got this, because by the time you get here, you're not going to remember this piece. All right. So instead, say, I'm going to work on this. I feel like I got this. So now I'm going to focus on this. Once I have this, then I'm going to do all of this together. All right. Then I'm going to tackle the next piece. Once I feel like I got this, then I'm going to go back and connect it to everything before it. Then I'm going to go ahead, then I'm going to connect it to everything before it. And really, this is the idea. The reason I said this is a micro process of memorization is because this is the same thing. This is the idea behind the new material and the recently memorized. The recently memorized are all these pieces that you're connecting the new stuff back to. Okay, so then you get here and you say, okay, I got a handle on this, and then you connect it back. Make sure you're always connecting back. All right. There's another note in this section about listening while memorizing. I think listening can be a very powerful tool when you're memorizing. I remember when I was younger and memorizing, I used to use it a lot. The only thing that I will warn you about is if you're listening because your reading fluency is not strong and you're using the listening as a crutch to your reading fluency, then I recommend you do not use it. Instead, go work on your reading fluency, spend a month or 2, really nail down your reading fluency. Then once you are fluent, your Quran memorization will be so much more enjoyable. Because if you're not fluent and you try to memorize the Quran, it becomes one of the most difficult tasks. It's very frustrating, very infuriating, just takes so long and you make so little progress. And the only reason that it's a problem is because the reading fluency isn't there yet. If you're fluent, you'll find that memorization will get better and better over time as well. But if you just jump into memorization right away without building fluency, it's going to be a tough road, a very tough road at the beginning. Ultimately, you'll figure out how to become fluent at some point, but it's better you just do it first before you jump into memorization. So I do think listening is very powerful. It's very helpful in trying to memorize things, but only use it if your reading fluency is strong. Really, you shouldn't be memorizing at all until your reading fluency is strong. That's my recommendation. You can memorize short surahs just by listening, like, you know, do your last few surahs that you would recite in prayer, but really dedicate the chunk of your time on fluency. Once you complete that, then start dedicating your time to memorization. All right. And then the last thing is personalize your process. So what I just laid out for you in these 2 ayahs, this is just general rules and guidelines. If something else works a little bit better for you, how many times do you read each thing? When do you listen? Do you listen after each few sections, or do you listen after you do all of it? That's going to really be dependent on you. Whatever you're comfortable with, whatever works better for you, try to personalize it, make that memorization process unique to you. All right. So that's kind of it. Yeah. So in the primer time, what I would recommend is during that 10-minute primer, you're reading this like 5-7 times. You close your eyes. Can you say it? Cool. Okay. next section, read it 5, 7 times, next section 5, 7 times. You're not worried about connecting back because it's just a primer, right? During the memorization time, you're now sitting and dedicating. You're like, I'm tackling this piece, I'm reading it a few times with purpose. I'm very conscious, I'm trying to learn it. I close my eyes, I can recite it. Okay, I'm moving to the next section. I'm connecting everything back. So in those 20 minutes, you're doing that exercise of breaking it up and connecting it all together. By the end, hopefully 10, 20 minutes into this process, if you're fluent in reading, you can do this in 10, 20 minutes. Then you'll get to the end and you'll feel pretty confident about these 2 verses. And then you should recite it to someone. You should recite it to someone. That's like a true test. So there's 2 like real tests. Okay, and I should probably add that to the document. After all this, always recite to someone. Recite new material to someone. Okay, so it's very important that there's a check to see whether you actually memorized it properly or not, because you could be making mistakes that you're not familiar with. So you want to find someone to recite to. This can be a parent, this can be a friend. It really doesn't matter. I'll give you, I'll end on a story in just a minute of, you know, it can be anywhere, it can be in college. Also, the other thing I would say is please don't stress yourself out by setting any kind of deadline for yourself, like, oh, I have to memorize the entire Qur'an in a year, or I have to memorize half of the Qur'an in this. Don't do that. Focus on building consistency, focus on your habits. Once you build your habit, I promise you the rest of it will come. Focus on what you're doing every single day, focus on the time that you're spending, and then ultimately, if you're consistent, you'll accomplish great things. All right. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is just a general, what does a schedule look like for a part-time person? The main time that I mentioned in the breakdown is the memorization time of the new material. That is the main time. So when I say main memorization time, that's like the time you're spending to really nail down that material. So primer is just reading it, kind of getting fluent. 20 minutes, I'm sitting now and I'm going to break it up, connect it together, and memorize it. For beginners to listen to someone slow and very clear. There's just tons and tons of reciters now. Honestly, I can't even keep up. But yeah, anyone slow with a good pace. Don't try to listen to anyone too quick. Memorizing with meaning, I think generally reading the vocab and using some kind of word by word Quran reference is good, but I wouldn't worry too much about the meaning. I would kind of just take a look at the word by word vocab. Maybe you pick up some vocab along the way, but I wouldn't make it an entire focus. Again, that's a different objective and goal. And so it would become, you want to stay focused on a goal. All right. Now, just to go over kind of a general, what would a week look like for someone part-time doing memorization part-time? Stable time, people. Okay, so I would say, let's do Monday. Okay, so for someone who's doing it part-time, I recognize that, there is you just don't have as many hours during the workday. Like if you have to work and you have a lot of other responsibilities, you're not necessarily going to be able to put in multiple hours a day, but I do recommend at least putting in an hour a day. And that's not necessarily all at once. That includes like the primer time and kind of splitting up your time. So what I would recommend is I would do a 10-minute primer of new material. This is not a great list. I should have done it the other way. Sorry. We're going to make sure this table looks decent. Okay. It's not like anyone knows the days of the week anymore, but I'm still going to put them here. I really should be putting like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because that's what weeks have become at this point. But let's say Monday, okay? Monday through Friday, let's say you're working and all that good stuff, okay? So I would recommend you should be putting in 10 minutes of primer. 10 minutes primer, 20 minutes main memorization of new material. And really, this is a primer of new material. And then at some point, I think you need to put in later in the day. These are not all the same time slot, but these are different, 15 to 30 minutes, I'll say, on recently memorized. Remember, you can't skip the recently memorized because you'll just keep chipping along. And if you don't go back and connect it to the rest of the surah, you'll come to the end of the surah and you'll be like, I don't remember the beginning. Right? I'm at the end of Surah Mulk and I don't remember the beginning anymore. And that's a problem. So you want to make sure that you review the last 5-10 lessons that you did. You read them a few times, and ideally you want to recite both of these things. Recite it at the end, recite to someone at the end. And this as well, ideally you want to recite to someone at the end. Okay, and really this is what you would do, I would say, during the work week, 5 days a week. So if you look at the total time, it's about an hour, right? 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how much time your recently memorized takes. And it's not all at once. So it's like your primer is 5-10 minutes at night, your new memorization is 20 minutes in the morning, then your 15, maybe your 15 to 30 minutes, that's like after the Dhuhr or sometime later in the day that you find to review your recently memorized. So you're splitting up this hour throughout your day. But remember, there's still a third component which we're not addressing. So we've got our new material addressed, right? We've got our recently memorized addressed. What we're not addressing is what about old material? And what I recommend is on the weekends, you can either take a break from new material for 2 days and just focus on your recently memorized and old material, or you can just add time to the existing thing. Now, again, if you only have an hour, then I would recommend just doing 15 to 30 minutes of recently memorized, and then I would do 30 minutes of old material. Okay, because remember, you're not addressing it throughout the week because you're busy, you have a lot of other things to do. However, you can't just abandon it. Okay, you have to make sure you go back and review the older stuff. All right, this is just an absolutely crucial thing. And I recommend that on the weekend, your routine changes a little bit. Maybe you're not doing new material on the weekend. All right. Does this make sense, hopefully? All right. Yes, the recording will be available, inshallah. All right. So again, if you're someone that needs to memorize new stuff every day, which I totally get that because that's the most fun part of this, if I'm being honest. The most fun stuff is learning new stuff. Revising and reviewing old stuff is not as exciting, but it's still very important. So if you're someone that's if you can add more time on the weekends, then go ahead and continue to memorize new material even on the weekends. That's okay. But again, you can't compromise the old material. If you're not doing it throughout the week, you have to at least do it on the weekends. All right, so this is a schedule. This is a schedule that I would say is for part-time people only. If you're a full-time like HIF student, obviously this is not for you. You're spending like 4 or 5 hours a day. That's a different ball game. Okay, this is for like a part-time memorization schedule. Okay. All right, and that's kind of it. So again, just to kind of reiterate, the key to all of this, there's two things. One is consistency. If you're not consistent, you're not gonna do any of this. And both of these systems, the reading fluency and this one, are designed with a time-based approach to help you build consistency. Because if you're not doing it time-based, I think it's hard to build consistency. But if you know that, okay, every day I just need to do, for reading fluency, I just need to do 10-15 minutes every single day. For memorization, I need to do 45 minutes to an hour every day. Okay, and not even all at once, but split up to different times of the day. But I need to just dedicate that much time a day. And you become really consistent in that, you'll accomplish great things. And really, once you get your first surah under your belt, you'll feel so good and you'll want to just keep doing it. So yeah, those are the two things: consistency and a time-based approach versus quantity-based. Yes, recommendations for people starting who have a few juz memorized already. Yeah, I recommend that you. Um, it depends how confident you are in your material. Like if it's been a long time and you really feel shaky in it, then I recommend just treat everything like new material. But because you've already memorized it before, you'll just get a lot more done in the 30 minutes. Like instead of doing 5, 10 lines, you'll probably be able to do 2, 3 pages. So just do that until, in 3, 4 weeks, you've reviewed everything you know, or, in 2 months, you reviewed everything you know, and then you can and then you can, in that same time that you were consistent in, you can now sub in the real new material as opposed to kind of the fake new material. Should we memorize sequence of words or picture of the page and photograph? Sequence of words. Um, I think that'll happen naturally. That's actually a great question. So what I would recommend is whatever you do, please read out of a consistent mushaf. Have your memorization Quran. I should have started with this, honestly. Whether it's reading fluency or Quran memorization, get a dedicated Quran. Make that your mushaf. It's like very personal to you. You don't leave anywhere without it. That's when you always read from. That's when you log your reading fluency times in. That's when you memorize in. Eventually will memorize out of. It just becomes such a personal thing to you, and it's really important to have that. All right, don't, nowadays digital, everyone wants to do everything digitally. While you're doing reading fluency and memorization, I really think there's a lot of benefit in doing it out of a physical mushaf to avoid distraction and to just be able to dedicate yourself for whatever time that you have set. All right. Recommendations for people who are starting. What if we have a large amount of old material covered? Would you suggest doing that over the week too? Yes, if you have a large amount of old material covered, I do recommend doing that throughout the week as well. It really depends. So with old material, what you want to think about is, can I get through all of my old material in 2 to 3 weeks? That's ultimately what you want to do. You want to make sure you're getting reps on your old material every 2 to 3 weeks, maximum every month. But if it's taking you like, if you're only doing it on the weekends and that's gonna make you only get your old material, cycle all of your old material like every 4 months, then that's a problem. So then maybe you wanna add some time throughout the week. And again, not adding too much, you can just do 15 minutes, add 15 to 30 minutes. So really it's gonna depend. If you have a lot memorized, then you're kind of, you're gonna have to do it every single day. All right, so I'm gonna end on one kind of motivational story. This is a real thing that happened. So when I was a senior in college, there was 2 students that were a few years junior to me, and there was in our MSA we had a bunch of guys that had memorized the Quran. So there was people who always had questions. Oh, I want to start memorizing. What should I do? And we'd sit with them and give them just like this basic conversation that we've just had. And some people started memorizing. So I remember I was in my senior year, and so we had just gone through that, and 1 or 2 brothers, they started memorizing, and they were doing this in college. Remember, they're pre-med students and they're full course loads, and they just started doing 45 minutes to an hour a day, and they were super consistent, and they kept doing that. And they would come in and ask questions like, okay, like, how should I do this better? Should I add more time for this? And eventually, after like a month or 2, they kind of just figured out the system. Once you start it, you'll figure it out. It'll kind of come together. You'll build a routine. And actually, what happened was these 2 guys, they kind of just partnered up. They started reciting to each other. That helped motivate them. They had someone that would check in on them, make sure they were doing it every single day. And they started doing this, 1 year. Literally, by the end of the second year, 2 years, they started this at the beginning of their freshman year. 2 years of college later, by the end of their sophomore year, while doing a full course load, while doing a full college course load of pre-med and all that stuff and whatever, not compromising it in school at all and really excelling. Both of them now are practicing physicians, and mashallah, may Allah increase them, but they also completed their memorization of Quran in 2 years, while going to college, while excelling in all of their classes, while taking a pre-med coursework. So it's definitely doable. But one thing I'll tell you about both of these guys, hardworking and consistent. There was a level of dedication. It was just like, this is never going to be compromised. Like, there were times where 6, 7 o'clock, you've gone to classes all day, you're exhausted, and now you just want to be done. They weren't done. You go into the MSA room and you saw them reading for 20, 30 minutes. They knew they had to do their reading, and they were reading in the corner, and they were doing their memorization, and then they'd catch up with everyone else. Like, it's not like they didn't have a social life, but they knew that 30 minutes, I'm going to get it in instead of resting, or instead of sleeping, instead of lounging or watching that show. I'm going to just get my 30 minutes in, and then I'll go join everyone else, right? And subhanAllah, in 2 years, they completed their memorization. And it's definitely doable. It's definitely possible. But the key, again, is consistency. And that's kind of it. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. Lastly, I hope that all of you benefited, and I hope that this motivated you to get started. Really, that's what I'd recommend. Is just get started. Try it this Ramadan. See what happens. Right. Start with reading fluency if your fluency is not quite there yet, and then slowly work into memorization. And just see what happens when you can recite the Quran more fluently. When you have confidence in your recitation, when you start memorizing, there's a connection there that is unlike. It's very personal to you, and that's a kind of connection and relationship that you want to have with the Quran. And hopefully this Ramadan, by having some kind of structure and some kind of routine, you can still feel that spirituality and that sense of accomplishment by the end of this month as well, inshallah. Even though it's going to be very different this month, but if we have something to focus on, you're really dedicating yourself to fluency or memorization, and you're structuring your day, and you're in addition to just fasting, you're adding all of these things, then hopefully, inshallah, you can make the most out of this month. The other thing, sorry, last thing, I wrote this note here and I didn't finish it, and I'm going to add notes here and upload this updated document. But recite to someone, the ultimate test of your new material to see if you really know it is after you think you know it, stand up and try to pray 2 rak'ah nafil and try to recite your new material, and you'll see that's the biggest test. That's why her father always encouraged to memorize, to lead tarawih, because there is no greater test of your memorization than that. So stand up and try to lead, recite what you just memorized in salah. And if you get stuck and you don't get it, that means you probably should spend a little more time on it. But that's like a great ultimate test. Okay. So I'll revise this document a little bit and upload it into that same folder. So again, the link to the notes is here. If you signed up through, qalamlive.com, all of the notes will also be posted wherever the recording will go. I don't know where it's going, but it's going to be somewhere and available to you all, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, barakallahu feekum. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this month beneficial for you and for all of us. Please make dua, lots and lots of dua for productivity, and make that dua for everyone, because the whole ummah is going to be struggling with this. So don't just make dua for yourself, make dua for everyone. And remember that when you make dua for your brother or sister in their absence, angels make that same dua for you. So if you want to do it with a bit of a selfish motivation, that's okay too. So you can do that as well. But please, yeah, let's just try to make the most of this. And jazakallah khair, barakallahu feekum. I gotta go pray Maghrib now, so I'm gonna have to end. Alrighty, assalamu alaikum.